Welcome to Park Place Gallery's exhibition City Limits. We're in Brooklyn on April 2020 at Two Suns. I am Michael Holden, gallerist at Park Place Gallery. With me is curator Peter Schenk and 6 of the 7 artists exhibiting in this show. Ryan DeWalt, Christina Sutgong, Lauren Comito, Simon Slater, Carrie Amarata, Jeff Pater.
So Michael and I have curated for a number of years. I think this might be show 5 or 6 curated together. So this was my endeavor with him. City Limits in a nutshell, or I'll backtrack a minute. I was watching a documentary. I like a lot of history, particularly New York City history. And I was really super engrossed and fascinated by the grid plan in terms of like throwing a date out that was basically introduced in 1809, 1810 as a way to fundamentally organize the city from Houston Street on up as the city was robustly like expanding. And when I heard these historians talking about it, it was really fascinating to me that it was a way on a lot of fronts to organize the city because it was just getting more and more chaotic. And if you look at anything roughly below Houston Street, it's just this streets running into each other at every angle. And this idea was almost like to democratize the city by having just right angles for every street and how you build them up, making it super easy to locate a street, block, and whatever. But what I liked about how the writers or the historians phrased in the documentary was that even though you have this extremely rigid plan, which had been implemented in cities before, but not on this level, there's still plenty of like reason for chance and a certain amount of chaos, as we all know, on a daily level in New York. And it just like really hit home to me that all these artists present were working with the grid in one way or another. Some you can see right away, some in the work it's a little bit more embedded, but that through that rigid element of grid, which is the scaffolding more or less early on in the work, chance, and maybe, you could say the word chaos, but a certain amount of chance and accident is allowed in the work by every one of these artists, and that just like hit home to me. So that's essentially the theme and the ethos of the show. I'll start, since he's closest to me, with Jeff Fischera. And a quick background, actually, even though we both went to University of Pennsylvania, but at slightly different times. We've known each other for a better part of a decade. That I chose called Variations is totally modular in its format. So you can move these panels around and create completely different compositional elements. When you get up close, there's the beauty of like the saturated tones and all that. But as you get back, it's this trompe l'oeil effect of like a holographic imagery. So stop there and turn it over to Jeff.
This, what you're seeing, started as a reaction to these huge paintings I was doing of the same subject. That it's just basically a life painting from observation of a holographic surface. I saw it at one point, and I just thought it was so paintable. Because first of all, you look at it and you might have a beautiful pattern, and you move over 2 inches and it's completely changed. It's a new painting. So I did 14 or 15 of these huge versions of this painting, and it was all the same thing. I painted the same one over and over again, and I wanted a way to do these projects with less preciousness. So I started doing much smaller pieces. The ones over here are 12 by 15 inches. And the thing I'm working off of is only 1 inch by 1.25 inches. I had it hanging on the wall. I just put a light here, or move the light over here. I tried to paint it in as many ways as I could, just variations of the same thing. How many can I make? I think I made 40 of these red squares. I also did a blue and a yellow. I was sort of going to do primary. I didn't get that far in the project. I kind of moved on to something else. But chance came into it, I was never planning on putting them together. They were individual pieces, and I thought they had to be, I thought the whole piece had to be something I saw, but I realized that these little fragments of little bits of action can go together in any way, and I'm not sure how the curators put it together, but I told them just to put them up random, just put them on the wall. Don't try to make it look nice. So it was in the studio, they were next to each other, and I realized this actually can be any size piece I want it to, or anyone wants it to be. It can be 1, or it can be 36 by 30. It can be very large. So in terms of observational painting, why it's so, the thing that I did differently with this body of work is I made the grid, I respected the edge of the canvas. I made the grid sharp with the edges, but the rest of it's all from life. So it's that's kind of where the work is at.
If you initially look at them, they're so strong abstractly, and just as studies individually what's going on in each panel. But when you talk to a viewer that hasn't seen the work before, and you say it's a holographic gift bag, they instantly get that reference because it does flicker like that, and it even flickers more with the arrangement of the various parts.
Jeff, you're dealing with the holograph, right? So that sort of is dealing with this extra dimension. In the work that I'm doing, I'm also interested in that, XYZ axis.
So I'm actually really glad you brought up the XYZ axis, because in my work, I started off using these flattened cardboard packaging forms as stencils in my work, and so I was dealing very much within like this 2D realm, having that create this kind of a new geometry for me to work with. But with the paintings, as they're being painted and the imagery is emerging, I am actually thinking about an XYZ axis, as the paintings take on depth. And there's a transformation and translation from the 2D object or the 2D stencil shape as it becomes a form in the paintings.
Yeah, they have this radiant quality.
But yeah, thinking about XYZ axis for sure.
So,
And with Jeff's work, I love that it's really about the performance and play with light, and it's this phenomena that we all experience. And I love that you got this inspiration from something that probably was given to you, and it was just sort of like a thing that you're supposed to like receive from some kind of transaction, and then you're supposed to discard it. And I love that you kept that. And really just focused and meditated on that, and used it as a kind of tool, but also as a kind of performance.
Yeah.
Or just to examine it more closely and to think about how it actually is impacting, us, whether unconsciously or consciously.
When you think of the XYZ axis, are you also thinking of your vanishing point, controlling the perspective?
I think that you can get that sense of like one point perspective, well, especially in this work that's on the pillar.
So you can, and that one has like kind of multiple perspectives, right?
Yes, absolutely. But I do want the viewer to feel like they can access them spatially. But they're more like, psychological spaces, imagined spaces. I work on the paintings very intuitively. And so I expect that people are going to build on the associations and project, onto the paintings. I mean, you could say that they're abstract, but
right. Right. Like
what is abstraction?
right. Yeah.
Especially in today's world.
Totally. Like with yours work, Lauren, like the straddling of both arenas. I mean, I think it could be said of everyone's work, but like Robert Otto Epstein's work, there's inherently like figures in there. Then it blends with a certain level of abstraction. Yours has so many motifs of the body, and then the energy flattens outward, much like with Jeff taking the gift bag, which is a 3D thing, and then flattening it down then it reverses itself back on itself and you walk 10 feet away and things gel into a trompe l'oeil effect of reflective like properties.
Yeah, I really like materials a whole lot, so it's important to me the process and how paint and wood and things react to carving. So that's pretty inherent to the work, which is not really about the grid. But I always give myself a few parameters or boundaries, I guess, and I've been working with the square for a while now, which sort of is like the start of where I think about the grid. I think about it a little less in terms of an XYZ axis, and I think of it more in terms of like squares, quadrants, like that painting and this painting are all quadrants too. And then these two are specifically about sacred geometry, which is obviously based in geometry. So like how things fit within each other or how things are built in our world with mathematics. So I think about that more with the grid more than I think of it in terms of axes
Do you
or
want to talk
space.
about the series?
Sure, so this series of these two in here are part of a sacred geometry series that I did where I made 10 paintings because sacred geometry is based on numbers, so 1 through 10, and so each painting is about one specific number. So the one that Peter was talking about is the triad, so on the number 3. This one's the hexa, which is on the number 6. So each of the paintings is sort of me meditating on the idea of the number or how life is built with numbers and mathematics. So, and I plan them pretty intensely before I start because I layer them and then carve, so I have to like think about it before I start carving, but then I sort of let the painting be what it needs to be too. So I like what you're talking about where like I want to plan the city with the grids and the lines, but I'm gonna make errors for sure,
Right.
which is sort of the point that I'm gonna make a lot of errors. And then also let the accident or let the paint or the wood do what it needs to do. Like I want the material to sort of have its own say in the painting.
And you have
That's
to like,
cool.
there's like a play it as it lies kind of thing, where you do, but
Yeah.
then you have to like, that's the color that's gonna come up as you carve into it.
Yeah.
But you've been doing it enough that you can
Yeah, like I can
push
plan.
what you want, but.
Yeah, like I could try to plan like, like I wanted the green underneath the blue to come through and I had to think about that a month before I even started carving it. But I'm gonna make errors along the way and then I can also paint back on top and then carve back in. So there's like the accident sort of becomes the point, I guess, or like how bad I am at making a circle or how bad I am at making a straight line. Like the imperfection of that is what I get excited about.
I think there's a lot. They look very perfect, but I think maybe how you are explaining the error is not necessarily an error, but perceiving the painting in the moment for what it is, which is just accepting it and responding to it based on being human and dealing with this object. And you do that in a thoughtful manner. Like everything actually looks very purposeful.
Yeah, it is quite purposeful, but yeah, I want my
but-
humanness to come out.
But it goes beyond the purposefulness to a complexity that is not obtainable if it's too plain. And I think that's where they really go an additional level, where it almost seems impossible to do. But that is ultimately planned to and understood of how to reach that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna add to that. So in terms of numbers, right, and mathematics, Rosenkrantz talks about the grid as being a tool of measurement, but also a window. So it's both
Yeah.
symbolic and it's also the material itself. And her take on the grid is that those artists like Agnes Martin that took up the grid, they never developed any further. And in that way, the grid is death. Do you think math is like beyond humanity? Is it here, even though even if we weren't here, would math be here or exist here?
So all my work is sort of about me looking into the ideas of my own spirituality in a way, because I grew up in a really intense Catholic Christian home. So the things in the past have been more about altars and Catholicism. So this particular series about sacred geometry is me thinking, how is the world made if the conceit is sacred geometry, right? Like that the Fibonacci sequence is like how the world is created. Like if there's a maker, God, what are the tools that made the world be? So I guess the answer would be, if we're under the conceit of sacred geometry, yes, numbers are first before humans. But I don't necessarily agree to that. I just like to ruminate on these ideas. How is the world created, right? Because I like to think of myself as like maker, craftsman versus like genius artist. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm a maker and I want to touch things and I want to like be, you know, physical with the work. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, what does that mean? How the world was created?
The math is this like almost, well, sacred, this holy level of organization, but you want the hand to show and the edges, and
Yeah.
the scale of like your biggest work has to also fit how like long your arm can go across the surface,
Right, yeah.
which is pretty interesting. So it's like there's all this, the high-minded stuff and the geometry, but there's the physicality of how you get that line across the surface, and that there's a finite quality to how well that can happen or how long it can be, which is interesting. Interesting. So the grid is inherent in Simon Slater's work. We, similar with some of the artists, or Jeff included, we both went to school together, and I've known Simon for quite some time, and he's done a variety of work. The work, and if we're talking about the object or packaging that he's made, a lot of his work has been a negation and rejecting canvas or conventional supports. And if he's going to make a sculpture, that sculpture is going to be only paint. It's going to have nothing to do with a wooden support or this and that, which, and for any given artist, it's like if that's what you zero in on. But he negated that, and what we're dealing with in this show are these like beautiful tapestries that he's woven together to create these portraits of himself that he's titled LA Divorce Self-Portrait. There's geometry at play, there's chance, but there's just like, there's so much of Simon's like humor and energy embedded in these, but these really interesting inventive tapestry that he's weaving together, and those are objects in themselves, and that we chose not to frame them on a wall. They're held up by magnets, which is a nice solution, but it's also a way to see like, that's the thing, that's the object, and you're right up in front of it. So
Thinking about this, because I'm a nervous guy, about what I was going to say, especially about the grid, what I realize is I have absolutely no relation per se to the grid.
that's what I like about it.
Yeah, that everybody else has. I think every application that we use on our phone is based on some kind of relational database, which is really a grid. It's a good place to explore if you want to. We live in the grid system in New York, but I think really my work, Peter put it correctly, is really being opposed to almost everything. And
It's a good place to start.
so it's less about the grid and more about like cutting things up. So the work I was doing prior to this, like you said, was about shredding the canvas, and this is very similar. It's just like cutting these things up, and then through doing these things, it's not only about kind of material interventions, but you get to some I don't know, areas of timbre that I don't think you can get to if you're thinking too hard about the problem. So these were really just about, I was out in California, I'm really into quilts, and East Coast boy out there, I was really into like the blue skies and the cactuses and aloe plants and all that shit. And so I just combined that all together into a single interest, image.
Well, it's interesting that you're really interested in the quilts if you're not so invested in grids. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how you make a quilt.
Yeah, sure, but
know.
I mean, it's not like I'm sitting there going, there's, you know, a bunch of squares this way.
Right.
It's certainly how it's built, but first of all, I don't think it has to be. Two, quilts are just great because quilts are great not because of their grid structure. Quilts are great because they're also an image, but they don't like sit dead on a wall. Like you can wrap yourself in them. You can give them to people as gifts. You can do any number of things. And really, from a practical storage perspective, they don't crowd up the studio because you can just kind of fold them and put them in a chest, which is, you know, living in New York in a small grid-like apartment. That's a good thing to be able to do.
So the woven aspect is part of your process in these works and a lot of your other bodies of work, which is kind of a straightforward grid of sorts.
Yeah.
And it does encourage chance, but there is a drawn image, but the outcome of it is a very psychedelic image that refers to Impressionism, Cubism, you know, how the figure is rendered and holds together and breaks apart. David Hockney's, as Peter mentioned, his photographic collages. So that outcome is actually the image that you're dealing with. And how do you perceive that image yourself in the context of the history of images and just the personal aspect of your own image?
Well, I mean, I think that human psychology is a very powerful thing, and you know, our brains, I guess, are like vacuum cleaners. You see a bunch of things. So, like a lot of people here, I went to art school and looked at a lot of stuff, and it's hard to not have that stuff seep through. So yeah, you're out in California, and then you can't stop thinking about David Hockney landscapes because they're right there, and you know, those colors are very alluring. I think that how do I perceive myself in them and my relation to them? They're self-portraits. I don't think that they're trying to be hiding by, like, you know, them falling apart and coming together, but I think that's just a nice way of sort of presenting the situation as it was at that time. So.
You don't pick apart the image and refine it. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, I certainly don't plan out the images, and I don't really, you know, I'm not looking to sort of be a very micromanaged conductor of the image and be like, you know, this has to be here, this has to be there. Yeah, I think it's usually sort of like a concept and a process, and then that gets you there. And I think it's a lot of fun to do that because it. I feel like if you plan things out, I mean, that's like what I do at work all day long, and you sit in meetings and you plan things out, you know exactly where things are going to go. It's much more fun to do something and then, frankly, wow yourself, like, whoa, I didn't expect that.
A certain, I would say with you even more than most, chance could be said of every artist, but welcome chaos in your work is like unapologetic, it's there.
Sometimes it's going to be failures, but I think like 9 times out of 10 you're going to find something there that's really cool, that's being ignored, really.
Looking at these, just thinking about everything that was said and looking at the works again,
Yeah.
thinking about the titles, you know, I'm thinking about this idea of kind of the reconfiguration of the self. I mean, they are in fact self-portraits, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the kind of freedom that one gains in that reconfiguration.
Yeah, I think freedom and sadness
And sadness.
and confusion and, you know, it's like all of that, I think, all together, you know, is there.
Well, and you said it another way, you said falling apart,
Yeah.
coming together.
Yeah, it's all happening at the same time.
Remember, was it Daniel who described your work as post-taste?
Yes, I think he did. I think he did.
I think
Artist Christina Sukang's work. I love Christina's work for a variety of reasons. I think it's just like there's a lot of bravery in how, if you want to say the foreground line interacts with the background lines of this grid. and that there's a play between each other. And not to sound like super dated, but I see like elements of like a Franz Klein painting or the best versions of them, where someone that looks at those paintings sees a black line over a white background. But if you're really looking at them, it's the gray kind of interesting muddiness of how that white has then come back into the black line, negated it, added to it, and there's an energy constantly between the background and foreground, which is an easy concept, but a really difficult thing to pull off, and pull it off with a lot of energy and bravery.